The morning sun cast golden rays across the harbor as tourists gathered along the waterfront. It was a beautiful Saturday in Copenhagen, and the pier was crowded with families enjoying their weekend. Street vendors sold ice cream and hot dogs while children ran around chasing pigeons, the smell of fresh pastries from nearby. Bakeries filled the air. Among the crowd stood members of the Royal Danish Guard in their distinctive uniforms. They were taking a brief break from their duties at the palace, walking in formation along the popular tourist area. These guards were known for their discipline and dedication to protecting the royal family. Their blue uniforms and tall bearskin hats made them easy to spot in any crowd. Lieutenant Erik Hansen was one of these guards. He had served in the Royal Guard for 7 years and took great pride in his work. At 32 years old, Erik was strong, well-trained, and always alert. Even during his break time, his eyes constantly scanned the surroundings. This was not just his job, but his nature. He had learned from his father, who was also a military man, that awareness could save lives. The pier extended far into the water, and at its end, families were taking photos with the sea in the background. Small boats bobbed gently in the harbor, and seagulls flew overhead, hoping for dropped food. It seemed like a perfect, peaceful day, where nothing could go wrong. Near the edge of the pier, a family had stopped to admire the view. The mother was busy adjusting her camera settings, while the father was checking his phone for directions to their next destination. Their 7-year-old daughter, Emma, stood beside them, wearing a bright yellow dress. She had blonde pigtails and carried a small stuffed dolphin she had bought from a gift shop. Emma was an energetic child, full of curiosity about everything around her. She had been excited about this trip for weeks, talking nonstop about seeing the Little Mermaid statue and eating Danish pastries. Her parents had promised her a boat ride later in the day, and she could barely contain her excitement. While her parents were distracted, Emma noticed something floating in the water below. It looked like a colorful ball, bobbing just a few feet from the pier. Without thinking, she leaned over the railing to get a better look. The railing was old and slightly loose, something the city had planned to fix but had not gotten around to yet. Erik and his fellow guards were about 50 meters away, discussing their afternoon duties. Erik happened to glance in the direction of the family. He noticed the little girl in the yellow dress leaning dangerously far over the railing. Something in his gut told him to pay attention. He took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the child. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. The railing Emma was leaning on suddenly gave way with a sharp crack. The little girl lost her balance, her arms flailing wildly as she tried to grab onto something, anything. Her scream pierced the air, cutting through the happy chatter of the crowd. Her stuffed dolphin fell first, hitting the water with a small splash. Then Emma fell. The cold harbor water swallowed her immediately. Emma had never learned to swim properly. She had only taken a few lessons at the community pool, and panic seized her as she hit the water. The shock of the cold made her gasp, and she accidentally swallowed water. She tried to scream but only managed to choke. Her yellow dress billowed around her as she struggled, her small arms reaching up toward the light above. On the pier, her mother turned at the sound of the scream. When she saw the broken railing and realized her daughter was gone, she let out a horrified shriek. The father rushed to the edge, looking down at the water in disbelief. Other tourists began to notice the commotion, pointing and shouting. Erik did not hesitate. The moment he saw the child fall, his training kicked in. While others stood frozen in shock, he was already moving. He dropped his ceremonial rifle, not caring where it landed. His heavy boots pounded against the wooden planks as he ran toward the edge of the pier. Other guards called after him, but their voices seemed distant and unimportant. The water was at least 4 meters below, and Erik knew it was deep and cold. But none of that mattered. A child was drowning, and every second counted. Without breaking stride, he reached the edge and launched himself into the air. His body arced gracefully before plunging into the harbor with a tremendous splash. The icy water hit Erik like a physical blow. The harbor was much colder than he had expected, even for September. His heavy uniform immediately began to soak up water, becoming heavier with each passing second. His boots felt like weights attached to his feet, pulling him down. For a moment, everything was dark and chaotic as he oriented himself underwater. Erik forced his eyes. opened despite the sting of the salty water. The visibility was poor, with murky green water and floating debris clouding his view. He kicked hard, fighting against the weight of his uniform, and broke the surface. He gasped for air and immediately began searching for the little girl. Above him, the pier had erupted into chaos. Tourists were shouting and pointing. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. Emma's mother was screaming her daughter's name over and over, her voice raw with terror. Her father was trying to climb down the pier's support beams, but was being held back by other bystanders, who feared he would fall too. Eric spotted a flash of yellow about 10 meters away. Emma had surfaced briefly, her small face contorted in fear and confusion. She was coughing and sputtering, her arms splashing weakly. Then she went under again, disappearing beneath the dark water. He swam toward her with powerful strokes, his military training overriding the discomfort of his waterlogged uniform. His arms pulled through the water with determination, each stroke bringing him closer. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears and the muffled sounds of panic from above. When Eric reached the spot where Emma had gone under, he did not hesitate. He took a deep breath and dove beneath the surface. The water was darker here, and he had to feel around blindly. His hands swept through the water desperately. 5 seconds passed, then 10. His lungs began to burn, demanding air. Just when he thought he would have to surface, his hand touched something soft. Fabric. He grabbed hold and pulled. Emma's small body was limp in his grasp, and for a terrifying moment Eric feared he was too late. He kicked hard, propelling both of them toward the surface. They broke through together. Eric held Emma's head above water with one arm, while treading water with his legs. The little girl was not moving. Her eyes were closed, and her lips had a bluish tint. Water dripped from her blonde hair, and her yellow dress clung to her tiny frame. Eric knew he had to get her to land immediately. He looked around and spotted a small maintenance ladder attached to one of the pier's support columns about 15 meters away. It would be a difficult swim while carrying an unconscious child and wearing a heavy uniform, but it was his only option. He adjusted his grip on Emma, holding her across his chest with one arm while using the other to swim. His legs kicked steadily, though the effort was exhausting. The weight of his uniform seemed to double with each stroke. His muscles screamed in protest, and his lungs burned. But Eric pushed through the pain, focusing only on reaching that ladder. The distance seemed endless. Each meter felt like a kilometer. Waves from passing boats made the swim even harder, pushing him off course. Eric had to constantly adjust his direction while making sure Emma's head stayed above water. His vision began to blur from the exertion, but he refused to give up. Finally, his hand touched the cold metal of the ladder. Relief flooded through him, giving him a burst of energy. He maneuvered Emma's body so he could hold her with one arm while gripping the ladder with the other. Climbing would be the next challenge. Above, several people had run to this section of the pier. Strong hands reached down toward them. Eric could hear people shouting encouragement and instructions. He began to climb, one agonizing rung at a time. His boots slipped on the wet metal. His arm trembled from holding Emma's weight. Halfway up, his foot slipped completely off a rung. For a heart-stopping moment, he dangled by one hand, Emma still clutched to his chest. The crowd above gasped, but Eric's grip held firm. He found his footing again and continued climbing. Strong hands grabbed Emma first, pulling her up to safety. Then multiple people reached down and hauled Eric up onto the pier. He collapsed on the wooden planks, gasping for air, water streaming from his uniform. But he immediately crawled toward where they had laid Emma. The little girl was not breathing. Her chest was not moving, and her face had an unhealthy gray color. Her small body looked so fragile lying there on the rough wooden planks. Emma's mother had broken through the crowd and fell to her knees beside her daughter, sobbing uncontrollably. Eric's training kicked in once more. He gently moved the mother aside and positioned himself next to Emma. He checked her airway, tilting her head back slightly. Then he began CPR, pressing on her small chest with measured compressions. He counted aloud, trying to block out the sounds of crying and shouting around him. Eric continued the chest compressions with steady rhythm. 30 compressions, then to rescue breaths. His hands were gentle, but firm on Emma's small chest. Water and time were the enemies now. Every second that passed without oxygen reaching her brain could cause permanent damage. The crowd around them had grown silent, watching with held breath. Emma's father had his arm around his wife, both of them crying quietly. Other tourists stood in a circle, some praying, others filming. Eric's fellow guards had pushed through the crowd and were keeping people back, giving Eric space to work. After the first round of CPR, nothing happened. Emma remained still and pale. Eric did not let panic set in. He started again. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. He could hear a siren in the distance. An ambulance was coming, but he could not wait. He had to keep trying. On the second round, Emma suddenly coughed. Water sprayed from her mouth as her small body convulsed. Eric quickly turned her on her side as she began to vomit up seawater. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Emma gasped, drawing in a ragged breath, then another. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Emma's mother lunged forward, grabbing her daughter and pulling her into a tight embrace. She was crying so hard she could barely speak, just repeating, "Thank you. Thank you," over and over, while rocking Emma back and forth. The father wrapped his arms around both of them, tears streaming down his face. Eric sat back on his heels, his own body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Water still dripped from his uniform, forming puddles around him. His muscles ached, and he felt suddenly cold as the adrenaline began to wear off. But seeing Emma alive and breathing made everything worth it. One of his fellow guards threw a blanket over his shoulders. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its lights flashing. Paramedics pushed through the crowd with their equipment. They immediately began checking Emma's vital signs while asking Eric questions about what had happened. He explained everything quickly and clearly, despite his exhaustion. They placed an oxygen mask over Emma's face and wrapped her in warm blankets. Her color was already starting to improve, though she was still coughing occasionally. The paramedics praised Eric's quick action, explaining that his immediate CPR had likely saved Emma's life. Brain damage from drowning can occur in just a few minutes without oxygen, as they loaded Emma into the ambulance. Her mother rushed over to Eric. She grabbed his hands, her own still shaking. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but she managed a grateful smile. She told him that Emma was their only child, their miracle baby, after years of trying. She said she could never repay him for giving her daughter back to her. Eric, uncomfortable with the attention, simply nodded and said he had only done what anyone would do. But the mother shook her head firmly. She told him that others had stood and watched. Only he had acted. Only he had jumped without hesitation. She said he was a hero, whether he wanted to admit it or not. The father joined them, shaking Eric's hand vigorously. He was a tall man with kind eyes that were still glistening with tears. He asked for Eric's name and information, saying he wanted to stay in contact. He wanted Emma to know who had saved her life. He wanted her to understand that there were still good people in the world who would help strangers without thinking of themselves. Eric gave them his name and the contact information for the Royal Guard headquarters. The family promised to visit once Emma was fully recovered. They wanted to properly thank him when they were not in such shock. As the ambulance doors closed and it drove away with sirens blaring, Eric felt a strange mixture of emotions washing over him. His commander had arrived at the scene. Captain Nielsen was a stern man with 30 years of military experience, but even his eyes were slightly misty. He clapped Eric on the shoulder and told him to go home and change into dry clothes. He said Eric had brought honor to the Royal Guard today. The captain's voice was gruff, but filled with genuine pride. News crews had begun to arrive. Having heard the emergency calls on their scanners, reporters were trying to push through the crowd, cameras ready. Eric wanted nothing to do with them. He just wanted to get out of his wet uniform and process what had happened. His fellow guards helped him escape through a back route, shielding him from the cameras. On the drive back to the barracks, Eric stared out the window without really seeing anything. His mind kept replaying the moment Emma fell, the cold water, her lifeless face, and then finally her cough. He thought about how different things could have been if he had looked away a second earlier. If he had hesitated even briefly, That night, Eric could not sleep. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's face underwater, pale and still. He wondered if this was what his father had meant years ago when he said that saving a life changes you forever. You carry that responsibility, that connection with you always. By the next morning, Eric's story had spread across Denmark and beyond. Someone in the crowd had recorded the entire rescue on their phone, and the video had gone viral overnight. It showed Eric running without hesitation, jumping into the water. And emerging with Emma, it showed him performing CPR with steady hands while chaos erupted around him. News websites had picked up the story, running headlines about the heroic royal guard who had saved a drowning child. The video had been viewed millions of times. Comments poured in from people all over the world, praising Eric's bravery and quick thinking. Some called him a hero. Others said he restored their faith in humanity. Eric woke to find his phone flooded with messages. Friends and family he had not heard from in years were reaching out. His mother called, crying with pride. His father, the stoic military man, told him he had never been more proud in his life. Even distant cousins were sending congratulations. At the barracks, his fellow guards treated him differently. There was a new respect in their eyes. Some of them admitted they were not sure they would have had the courage to jump. The cold water, the heavy uniform, the risk of drowning themselves while trying to save someone else, these were real dangers that Eric had ignored completely. Captain. Nielsen called Eric into his office that afternoon. Eric stood at attention, expecting some kind of reprimand for abandoning his post and losing his rifle in the water. Instead, the captain told him that the royal palace had been in contact. The incident had come to the attention of the royal family themselves. Queen Margrethe had personally requested to meet Eric and commend him for his actions. The captain explained that a formal ceremony was being arranged. Eric would receive a medal for bravery and exceptional service. The news left Eric feeling overwhelmed. He had never sought recognition or awards. He had simply reacted to an emergency. Meanwhile, at Copenhagen University Hospital, Emma was recovering well. The doctors were amazed at how fortunate she had been. Children who nearly drown often suffer serious complications, but Emma showed no signs of brain damage or lung problems. They credited the immediate rescue and CPR for her remarkable recovery. Emma's parents had not left her side since arriving at the hospital. They held her hands, read her stories, and thanked God or fate or whatever power had placed Eric on that pier at that exact moment. Emma herself did not remember much about the incident. She recalled leaning over the railing to look at something in the water, and then everything went dark. The next thing she knew, she was in an ambulance with an oxygen mask on her face. The hospital room was filled with flowers, get well cards from strangers who had heard about the rescue. News reporters had tried to get interviews with the family, but Emma's father firmly declined. He said his daughter needed privacy to recover, not cameras and questions. However, he did release a statement through the hospital, thanking Eric and asking for privacy during Emma's recovery. As word of Eric's actions spread, the debate began on social media and news programs. Some people called him a hero without question. Others argued that he had only done his job, that any decent person would have done the same. A few critics even suggested he had acted recklessly, putting himself in danger unnecessarily when he could have called for. Professional rescue services. Eric tried to ignore the commentary. He did not think of himself as a hero. He had seen a child in danger and responded with his training. That was all. The idea that someone would stand by and do nothing while a child drowned seemed unthinkable to him. Yet he understood that fear paralyzes people. In crisis moments, most people freeze. Acting requires overcoming that instinctive fear. A week after the incident, Eric received a letter at the barracks. It was hand-delivered by a courier from the hospital. Inside was a drawing made by Emma. She had used crayons to draw a picture of a man in a blue uniform pulling a girl in a yellow dress from water. Above it, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for saving me." Included with the drawing was a letter from Emma's parents. They wrote about how Emma was doing well and would be discharged from the hospital soon. They expressed their eternal gratitude and invited Eric to visit them at their home once Emma was settled. They wanted him to see that she was truly okay, thinking it might give him peace of mind. Eric found himself deeply moved by the simple drawing and the sincere letter. He carefully placed them in his locker, knowing he would keep them forever. That evening he wrote a response, telling Emma how brave she had been and encouraging her to always be careful near water. He suggested she take swimming lessons once she felt ready, not to be afraid of water but to respect it and learn to be safe around it. The following week, the formal ceremony took place at the royal palace. Eric dressed in his full ceremonial uniform, which had been cleaned and pressed to perfection. His parents attended, along with his fellow guards and commanding officers. The palace hall was magnificent, with high ceilings and portraits of past monarchs lining the walls. When Eric's name was called, he walked forward with measured steps. Queen Margrethe herself presented him with the Medal of Merit for Bravery. She spoke about how Eric represented the best of Danish values: courage, selflessness, and quick action in the face of danger. She said his actions had inspired people not just in Denmark but around the world. As the medal was pinned to his uniform, Eric glanced at the audience and saw Emma and her family in the front row. Emma was wearing a pretty blue dress and holding her stuffed dolphin, which had been retrieved from the harbor and cleaned. When their eyes met, she gave him a big smile and waved enthusiastically. Eric smiled back, and for the first time since the incident, he felt truly at peace with what had happened. After the ceremony, there was a small reception where Eric finally had a chance to speak properly with Emma and her family. Emma ran up to him without shyness, her blonde pigtails bouncing. She looked completely healthy now, her cheeks pink and her eyes bright with energy. It was hard to believe this lively child had been lifeless in his arms just 2 weeks earlier. Emma told Eric that she had been practicing swimming with her father at a pool. She said she was not scared of water anymore because her father had explained that water was not bad. She just needed to learn how to be safe around it. She spoke with the innocent wisdom of children, explaining that her stuffed dolphin had also been in the water and was not scared either. Her mother pulled Eric aside, her eyes filling with tears again. She explained that the incident had changed their entire family. They no longer took any moment for granted. Every dinner together, every bedtime story, every morning greeting felt like a precious gift. She said Eric had not just saved Emma's life, but had given them all a second chance to appreciate what they had. The father added that they had started a small foundation in Eric's name. It would provide free swimming lessons to children from families who could not afford them. They believed that teaching water safety could prevent future tragedies. Eric was touched by this gesture, thinking it was a beautiful way to create something positive from a frightening experience. Over the following months, Eric's life gradually returned to normal, though things were different now. He had received offers for interviews, book deals, and even a proposal for a movie about the rescue. He declined them all. He had no interest in fame or profiting from what he considered simply doing the right thing. His job was to serve and protect, and that was enough for him. However, he did agree to speak at schools occasionally, talking to children about water safety and the importance of staying calm in emergencies. Emma sometimes joined him at these events, sharing her story in her own words. She told children to always tell an adult if they were near water, and never to lean over railings, no matter how interesting something looked. These school visits became meaningful to Eric. He saw how his story inspired children to think about helping others. Many kids told him they wanted to become guards, or firefighters, or doctors when they grew up. Others simply promised to be more careful around water. Each conversation reminded him why his action that day had mattered so much. Eric's relationship with Emma's family deepened over time. They invited him to Emma's 8th birthday party, where she introduced him to all her friends as the guard who saved me. The children looked at him with wide-eyed admiration, asking if he had a superhero costume under his uniform. Eric laughed and explained that real heroes did not need costumes, just courage and training. One day, Emma's father asked Eric if he had any regrets about that day. Eric thought carefully before answering. He admitted that sometimes he still had nightmares about not reaching Emma in time, about what could have happened if he had hesitated even a moment longer. But he had no regrets about jumping in. The only thing he would change was the outcome if it had been different. The The family showed Eric how the swimming foundation was growing. They had already provided lessons to over 100 children. Some of these children came from refugee families who had fled across dangerous waters to reach Denmark. Teaching them to swim felt especially important, giving them skills that might save their lives in the future. Eric also learned that several other people had been inspired by his actions to take first aid and CPR training. The video of the rescue had sparked conversations across Denmark about emergency preparedness. Many parents had enrolled in classes to learn what to do if their child had an accident. In a way, Eric's single act of bravery was creating ripples of positive change throughout society. At the Royal Guard, Eric was promoted to the rank of senior lieutenant. While the promotion was based on his overall service record, everyone knew the rescue had played a role. His commanders trusted him with more responsibility, knowing he could make critical decisions under pressure. He began training new recruits, emphasizing awareness and quick thinking in emergencies. During training sessions, Eric often shared his experience from that day. He taught recruits that their uniform meant more than ceremony and tradition. It meant being ready to protect people at any moment, even during off-duty time. He explained that true service sometimes required split-second decisions that could not wait for orders or approval. Emma's mother once asked Eric what had gone through his mind the moment he decided to jump. He told her the truth. He had not really decided anything. There was no conscious thought process, no weighing of risks versus benefits. He saw a child falling, understood she was in mortal danger, and his body moved before his mind could object. Training and instinct had merged into pure action. She found this answer fascinating. She said most people would have frozen, their brains flooding with fear and doubt. But Eric's training had created different pathways in his brain, pathways that led directly to action rather than paralysis. She thought this was what made the difference between those who helped in emergencies and those who stood watching. As the one-year anniversary of the rescue approached, a newspaper wanted to do a follow-up story. Eric agreed only if Emma and her family also participated. The resulting article focused not on him as a hero, but on the broader themes of community, responsibility, and the importance of learning emergency skills. It featured photos of Emma thriving and information about the swimming foundation. The anniversary also brought an invitation that Eric never expected. Emma's school asked if he would speak at their annual assembly about courage and helping others. Eric was nervous about addressing such a large group of children, but Emma insisted he had to come. She said her friends talked about his rescue all the time and wanted to meet him. On the day of the assembly, Eric wore his uniform and brought some of his equipment to show the students. Hundreds of children sat cross-legged on the gymnasium floor, their eyes fixed on him as he told the story. He spoke simply and honestly, without exaggeration. He explained that being brave did not mean not being scared. It meant acting despite fear because someone needed help. Emma stood beside him during the presentation. She told the children what she remembered and how she had learned important lessons about safety. She demonstrated the proper way to wear a life jacket and showed them what to do if they ever fell into water accidentally. Her confidence and cheerfulness proved to the other children that scary experiences could be overcome. After the assembly, children lined up to ask Eric questions. They wanted to know if the water was very cold, if he was scared of drowning, if his uniform was heavy when wet, if he got in trouble for losing his rifle. Eric answered each question patiently, impressed by their curiosity and intelligence. Some children told him about times they had helped others, and he praised each story, no matter how small the action had been. One little boy, no older than 6, asked Eric the question that would stay with him forever. The boy asked if Eric thought about Emma every day. Eric knelt down to the boy's eye level and answered truthfully. He said yes. He thought about Emma often, but not with sadness or fear. He thought about her with happiness, because she was alive and well. He said she reminded him why his job mattered and why choosing to help others was always the right choice. That evening, Eric had dinner with Emma's family at their home. It had become a tradition for them to share a meal on the anniversary. Emma had made a card for him, decorated with stickers of guards and dolphins. Inside, she had written, "Thank you for being my hero and my friend." Her parents gave him a framed photo of Emma, healthy and smiling, with an inscription that read, "Because of you, we have tomorrow." During dinner, Emma's father spoke about how the incident had changed his priorities. He had been working long hours at a demanding job, often missing family time. The near loss of his daughter had shocked him into reevaluating what truly mattered. He had since changed to a position with better hours, choosing family over career advancement. He said Eric had saved Emma's life, but in doing so, had also saved their family. Emma's mother added that she had trained as a volunteer EMT after the incident. She wanted to be able to help others the way Eric had helped Emma. She had already responded to several emergencies in their neighborhood, including helping an elderly man who had collapsed from a heart attack. She said Eric's example had shown her that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when properly trained. As they talked, Eric realized that the rescue had become more than a single moment in time. It had been a catalyst for change in multiple lives. The swimming foundation, the first aid training, the family's renewed closeness. His own growth as a leader, all of these things had rippled outward from those terrifying minutes in the cold harbor water. Emma asked Eric if he would teach her to dive someday. She said she was not afraid of water anymore and wanted to explore underwater, maybe even become a marine biologist. Her parents looked concerned, but Eric saw the determination in her eyes. He promised that when she was old enough and had completed proper swimming courses, he would introduce her to a professional diving instructor he knew. He believed facing fears was important, as long as it was done safely and with proper training. Later, as Eric prepared to leave, Emma hugged him tightly. She whispered that she told people he was not just the guard who saved her, but her friend. This simple statement moved Eric more than any medal or ceremony could. He realized that the greatest reward for his actions was not recognition, but the genuine connection he had formed with this family. Walking home that night, Eric reflected on the journey from that chaotic day to this peaceful evening. He thought about all the small choices and moments that had led to him being on that pier at exactly the right time. If his patrol route had been different, if he had been looking the other way, if he had hesitated even briefly, the outcome could have been tragic. But he had been there, and he had acted, and a little girl was alive because of it. Emma would grow up, go to school, make friends, fall in love, have adventures, and maybe even save someone else someday. All of those future moments existed because he had jumped into the water without thinking of himself. Eric understood now what his father had meant about carrying a saved life with you forever. Emma would always be part of his story, just as he was part of hers. Their lives had intersected in a moment of crisis, and that intersection had created bonds that would last a lifetime. He did not see himself as a hero, but he accepted that his actions had mattered profoundly. As he reached his apartment, Eric looked at the medal on his shelf and Emma's drawing beside it. Tomorrow he would return to his duties at the palace, standing guard with discipline and dedication. But he would do so with a deeper understanding of why his service mattered. It was not about the ceremony or the uniform. It was about being ready to protect people, to act when others might freeze, to choose courage over comfort. And if another emergency ever arose, Eric knew without doubt that he would jump again. Because that was who he had chosen to be, someone who helped when help was needed. The cold water, the heavy uniform, the risk, none of it mattered when a life hung in the balance. That was the true meaning of service, and it was a meaning he would carry with him for the rest of his life.